Say, got it.
So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Dylan Charles is back, and our topic is the emasculation of the modern man.
Wow. Thank you, Judith, for having me. It's a joy. It's been, I don't know, this is the third or fourth time I've joined you, and I really appreciate you. Yeah, this will be an interesting one.
Yeah, yeah. Is there such a thing as emasculation of the modern man?
Well, I think we're here talking about it because it's pretty obvious. I mean, I don't want to be flippant or anything, but um, yeah, I mean, what does emasculation really mean? Just looking at like definitions, it means, for man to be deprived of his male role or identity, to be made weak or less effective, to be deprived of vigor, spirit, strength, power, confidence. So yeah, I would say we see a lot of that. I think it's important to note from the get-go here that my perspective on this issue particularly is shaped by my personal experience. I'm not a scholar. I don't have any scholarly interest in this topic. And so my personal experience around this subject is critical. And that experience really is rooted in the fact that I've been with the same woman for 30 years. Okay. I've been in a long-term relationship. We just celebrated our 27th marriage anniversary just a couple months ago in June. And so this topic is very important to me, but it's all experiential,
Mhm.
right? So I see how the dynamic, and really what we're talking about, emasculation, we're talking about a man's role or identity. Well, the backdrop of that, to see like what that actually means, you can look at that in the context. I think the most powerful context to look at it and see it clearly is in the context of relationships. Okay, so mostly we'll be talking about heterosexual relationships, but some of the things I think are really critical or important to note that what we're talking about, like the way that I see it, like the most important factor of this is about polarity. It's about how people relate. It's about the energy of the I don't want to say just a male female relationship, because I know like even in homosexual relationships they can have just as stark of a striking polarity in their relationship as well. So one member exhibits very masculine energies and qualities and the other very feminine. And so like the thing that I see is that the polarity between a couple is absolutely essential.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what's really been chipped away at our ability to feel complementary to each other. And so I think that emasculation, like really the way to look at it is to really understand what's happening with relationships and the dynamic between. We'll hone in on men and women, but I wanted to point out that even in homosexual relationships, like the if the dynamic isn't there, the polarity's off, and the relationship isn't what it could be, should be, needs to be. In other words, neither partner gets what they need and are seeking out of it. So, yes, I would say absolutely there is a situation of emasculation taking place with men.
Mm. I would say it's also yeah, for lack of a better term, let's say a social construct. And it
Mm-hmm.
has been a long way coming. When you look back, I mean, you are no longer in your 20s now. So,
Long way off, yeah.
could you point out, the starting point of all of this? Where, because I have a strong feeling that it is, for the most part, engineered.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely evidence to support that. Um, you could have a whole conversation on this, Judith, and just talk about the social engineering happening right now with human relationships, especially sexual relationships. So, of course, that involves all the transgender stuff, all of the gender
Mm.
bending, all of that stuff is involved in this. And so you could climb up that ladder and look at things from the top and say, okay, well, if there is this new world order agenda, which many pieces of it are absolutely clear, so I'd have to say that that's you kind of take that as a given now. There is an agenda to change the landscape of relationships and the landscape of how we socialize. But if there is that, And if the agenda does involve something along the lines of depopulation or just separating people so that they're isolated and incapable of standing, standing against the storm, if you will, then yeah, it would make sense to deteriorate, to attack relationships. Um, Fatherless homes are a huge issue in America specifically. I know in America for sure. I mean, I don't know if it's 40 something percent of homes. There's no father living in the home. These things have consequences. They have effects on people. They have effects on society and culture. And then if you really look at what's happening today, and this is something I pay attention to carefully because I coach a lot of different type of people, and a lot of the men that I coach are in long-term relationships as it happens to be. And you can see that they're dealing with a lot of the same issues. But so I pay attention to relationship stuff. There's a lot of social media. There's a lot of conversation out there about relationships and dating and whatnot. And it's a very complicated landscape now. And I think that the social media, if you look at a lot of it, you'll see there's a lot of acrimony. There's a lot of like resentment. There's a lot of like just anger. There's a lot of confusion, but there's also a lot of this talk about, you see this over and over again. Women don't need men. Men are
Yeah.
giving up. Where are all the good men at? The good men don't want relationships anymore. So yeah, so looking at it from the perspective of, let's say there's a nefarious entity that wants to disrupt um, disrupt socialization and perhaps even get into depopulation. Yeah, we'll prevent people from hooking up, prevent people from mating, prevent people from creating solid nuclear families and supporting those kids through their youth, and all of those things lead to the chaos. I think that makes it possible for all the high agenda kind of stuff that you mentioned, that you talk about on your show, to take place.
Yeah.
When people are solid, when they're comfortable in themselves, when they're really solid in their relationships, when they're really solid in their homes, when their homes are stable, when you grow up and your home is stable and you have your parents there, the world looks different. You're generally relieved of a lot of the fear and anxiety that's just inherent in our society, and that gives you confidence in the will to have your way with the world, like to do what you believe is right. So yeah, absolutely. If I don't specifically talk about the agenda, but we all see it. I mean, it started probably with the feminist movement, and that's kind of a complex subject for someone like me who's been who is married to a beautiful, amazing, incredibly successful, powerful woman. And she just turned 50. I'm 48, and she and her friends, all a group of like married moms and stuff, like they all are having the conversation among themselves that yeah, they've been gypped historically. Like women have been gypped historically. Like there is this thing called the patriarchy. There has been the energetic dynamic between men and women has been very dominated by men, let's say, right? And so I think that powerful women like my wife, like she wakes up to this kind of thing and starts to see that, and I see that as making it difficult for her to relax and understand how important it is to um, appreciate and value and live in the natural cycles of things. This is the natural way that things are. And no, it's not natural for a man to abuse a woman. It's not natural for a man to control a woman. That's not necessary. But to play the part, to understand and respect like your inherent energy, what you embody, what you're supposed to embody, what your role naturally is, where you're most comfortable, where you're happiest. A lot of that's turned on its head. A lot of that's turned upside down, and so it's making it very difficult for people to feel, especially men, to feel powerful. These are all the things about emasculation, but powerful, strong, vigorous, confident in their relationships with women, whether that's dating or long-term relationships. So social media is, if anybody jumps on there and like looks up, just kind of skims the landscape of social media, the content about dating right now is just vitriolic. I mean, it's bonkers. Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
women are not satisfied with men. Men are giving up.
Mm.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I remember here in Germany, we had a time when a woman wanted to pick up a job, she needed permission from her
Right.
husband.
Right.
So I guess we are all happy that these days are gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think nobody wants an over-possessive, overbearing husband that controls you every step of the way,
or vice versa.
or vice versa,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And but on the other hand, um, I would not be interested, in a whimsy, flimsy man that is so insecure that he cannot stand
Mm.
up for himself. Like most things in life, it's about balance.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a clear and present need for a new homeostasis, right? A new
Yeah.
type of balance, because when I listen to my wife talk about, her experience as a woman and, the experience of her friends as a woman, like when they really reflect back and think of it, they weren't old enough to experience that. But yeah, it's messed up that like in order to get a job, they needed permission from a man, right? So understandably so, when you look back at that, like you feel poorly treated. Understandably so, you were, right? That's not okay. But now that we've broken out of that, there's definitely a need to find a new balance. And, you know, quite frankly, the situation that I see, like when I work with individuals, with men on this, it takes a lot of personal responsibility. It takes a lot of taking, just saying, hey, there's a situation, there's a problem, there's a dynamic in my relationship, and I'm going to take responsibility for it on my part, right? Like I'm going to own it and do everything I can. She's going to behave the way that she's going to behave, and I'm going to work on um, like being the type of man that can navigate these types of situations. And a lot of men just simply aren't. One of the key like important factors or reasons for that is, I think, is like this the rise of emotionality. We can call it something dramatic like that, like emotionality is king now. There was a time when logic and rationality, had their day. But right now we're living in a very emotionally charged world. So we're not in mass using the highest parts of our brain. We're not using the top level functioning of the human mind when we're living in emotionality. But women, generally speaking, when you talk about the just inherent energetic differences between men and women, um, women they are chaotic, they are emotional, they are volatile, right? They're like the ocean, right? These are qualities of the nature of women. And in this environment where everything is like it's so extremely just hyperbolic and emotional, I see that a lot of men have collapsed into that emotionality as well. And so I think that the way forward for men is a rational, intellectual approach to how they live and how they approach relationships in life. And I've seen this in my own marriage, and I've seen this in a number of men that I've worked with. That like when you can muster that energy when yourself, when you can develop, cultivate, and bring that energy forth, uh, you arrive at situations with a woman with a level of peace and clarity and unflappability, if you will. Like their emotionality can't penetrate you and cause you to react emotionally, right? And so this is something that I work with on myself all the time, but especially with my clients, my male clients. It's like we have to be able to step out of the emotional anality. We have to be able to rise above that level of consciousness, that feeling of we have to be able to observe emotionality but not participate in it. So, but yeah, I mean, there's a balance that men can achieve with work, and I think there's no social cues, there's no direction from any of the forces, media, or anything in our society that would inspire them to do this. I mean, if you look at all the cues that we get, it's all hypersexualization, over sexualization, the absolute pandering to your impulses, right? This sense of like to be a man is to be self-destructive, to be materially focused, to be impulsive. These are the qualities which are inhibiting men from feeling in their strength and in their power, which makes them emasculated, as we can say.
Mm. One term that has permeated the discussion, of course, is toxic masculinity. And I have to, I hate that word really, because, um, when you type it in, millions and millions of articles will show up, yeah, talking about toxic masculinity. But to me, it always appears that the the fundamental idea is that there is something broken in men, and it can only be fixed if they behave more like women. And yeah, really, if you read articles about toxic masculinity, you will, and that is exactly what you said, that also men have collapsed into
Yeah,
emotionality.
right. I think it's I think there's such a thing as well as toxic femininity.
Yeah, sure.
Um, yeah, toxic masculinity has become this part of the lexicon, and there's like you said, thousands and thousands of articles and hits on it. But the origin of it is, I don't know, it's warranted in some degree. I mean, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. I mean, I've dealt with many men who are just like the bravado, the ego, the overconfidence, the self-aggrandizement. Like these things are true, genuine qualities, but that's anyone has the capacity to lose control of themselves to their ego.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really what the like the foundation of the term toxic masculinity is, just a guy that's like, completely ego driven and out of control in that regard. And yeah, nobody likes that douche. Like, nobody wants to be around that guy. So it's a thing. But it's just like, so many things in our culture, like, I mean, even the term conspiracy theory, like it really means one thing. It really has a root in the meaning of other thing. It really means that, yeah, there's a real situation where people do conspire to do things, often bad things, and they don't talk about it. And so when you see things in action, you have to theorize what's going on. But then the word gets picked up and bounced around the lexicon and takes on its own life and its own meaning. So I think the term toxic masculinity is kind of out, like it doesn't serve anymore. I don't even really hear it used that much anymore. It seemed like over the last 10 years it was really, a lot of people were talking about it. But the real problem I see now is that, perhaps the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, but it's the toxic emasculation of men. I mean, men have lost so much of their vigor, their strength, their power, their confidence, and whatever, that they're not doing themselves or anybody much good. Um, but half of that term toxic masculinity is about masculinity. And so I recently had a conversation with one of my coaching clients about what it actually means to be masculine. What does that even mean, like on a day-to-day basis? Like, he's like, I sense that I don't feel masculine enough. Well, I mean, it's the energy that you bring to anything that you do, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's the way that you handle and respond to challenging situations. It's the feeling and the vibe that you have about yourself and what you're capable of. And so when a man, and you could perhaps look at it and say, okay, well, men don't really know their power. They don't know their purpose, their mission. They don't know what direction they're supposed to go. And yeah, this is all symptomatic of a collapse in that. A masculine man has a mission. He has a purpose. He knows what he's doing. He's able to direct and lead. He's able to take calculated risks, right? He's able to be willing to risk it all, to speak his mind or to say no. Like that's a big one. Like these effeminated men, if you want to call them that, they don't have the capacity to say no. Right? They've lost the
Hmm.
capacity to stand up and say no. And it's like when you really watch and pay attention to, or even read, there's a lot of good literature on this. Like something within women, like they're attracted to that. They're attracted to that firmness, that stability. They're attracted to a man who doesn't, like you said, what did you call him? A wet noodle? No, you didn't say that, but they're attracted to a man who isn't a pushover, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who isn't a pushover. So, speaking for myself in my relationship, at 27 years of marriage, we've been through a lot. Like we've been through a lot. We've been to the brink and back. We've had the highest highs and the lowest lows. And we've really coming out of a period of transformation and change. We have three teenagers now, so that adds a lot to the dynamic. But for a few years there, like I went through this, like I went through this collapse of masculinity within my marriage. And so I know what it feels like. And it's very, very frustrating. I could never put my finger on what was going on. I was always very upset, always very, a lot of hurt feelings, right? A lot of things taken personally, a whole lot of frustration, right? I think things should be this way, but they're not. And I don't know how to navigate them and steer them, towards being this way. We'll speak about this in a minute, but that speaks to the level of consciousness where a lot of men operate in. It's a level of desire, right? So desire is a level of consciousness that brings with it an extraordinary amount of frustration. And so, in my marriage, I saw this, and it's been probably two and a half or so years. It was really going through the thick of it, and just weren't clicking. I wasn't able to stand my ground. I wasn't able to speak up for myself, and on the other side of the coin, what my wife was going through was she was going through a period of tremendous personal success, tremendous corporate success, like really just finding her place in the corporate world. And she's just a badass at that. And, finding, respect from her colleagues, male and female, and being pulled up to the higher levels of, to participate in upper management, executive, like she's going through all this stuff where she's in a very she's all day long, she's operating at a very alpha level, right? And she's very much in control, in command, right? People are coming her to make decisions, like she's, in charge of things, right? Like, so that requires a certain energy of her. And so she was exercising this energy in her life all day, every day, whereas I was on the other side of the spectrum and kind of collapsing into that. And so I journeyed with the shamanic medicine at Boga. It's been 2.5 years, and it had been a few years since I had done it. But I felt really called to gather some insight from what this grandfather medicine had for me. And so I set up. I have a lot of experience with it. So I set up I consulted with one of my teachers and colleagues and said, how would you feel about me doing a ceremony by myself? And we all kind of meditated and listened to what the spirit told us. And I have enough experience, wisdom. I know what to do. I know how to conduct myself. I know what to expect. And so, yes, go forth and learn what you need to learn right now, Dylan. And that experience, very, very, very powerful awakening experience, that journey, because I was able to see, in Iboga, you can see how your life works. You see situations in your life over and over again, and you see how the choices you've made are affected by the beliefs that you hold on to, and how these choices and beliefs compound and sort of like fractally affect your life from henceforward. So one decision you make 20 years ago, you can see clearly in this state of consciousness how that decision impacted you and keeps impacting you, like what course it took you on, like which path in the road it took you on. And so the messages I got clearly were about energy and the presentation of what you would call yang energy, like the yin and yang, right? And the lack thereof. And so that gave me a lot of food for thought. It gave me a lot to work with. What I realized though was that when a man sort of inherently and sort of naturally comes to that kind of conclusion himself, oh, I need to feel more powerful. I need to be more masculine. Um, how do they exercise that? What do they do? And in the culture and the society that we have, so much of the exercise of masculinity has to do with sex, sexualization, and money, and money, and money, And it's like, if a man steps up and says, okay, I want to feel more masculine and more, I want to embody more of this energy in my life, immediately turn to, I'm going to stack bills, right? I'm going to make money and, chase women, right? That's when you'll know you're masculine, right? And I don't think that's true. I think that what men are really seeking is a peace, a freedom within themselves, right? And so really, like, what is the drive for a man? What is the drive for that yang energy? And it really has everything to do with freedom, right? Pushing through, penetrating, overcoming, establishing a home base on the other side of the other territory, right? Setting up camp and being free, right? Being
Mhm.
free from obstruction, being free from restriction, from containment. Like that's the inherent masculine drive of a man, is to seek freedom. And, chasing women and getting money isn't the same thing as being free within yourself. And so again, and I'll say this a lot, but like the work that I do with my coaching clients, like we focus on inner freedom, and freedom from what? Truly like freedom from the emotionality, especially the emotionality of the lower vibrational emotions, fear, anxiety, doubt, overwhelm, guilt, shame, anxiety. I might have said that, but these emotions, right? This unhealthy pride, anger, resentment, toxic resentment. These are huge, right? So to be free from these emotions allows a man to stand as a rock in the presence of a woman, whatever she's going through, whatever part of her cycle she's on, like to stand there as a rock and not react emotionally. And when a man can react to that situation intellectually, not only is it diffusing for the woman's emotional charge, but it's complementary to it. And so, like, those two pieces together create a unified whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Right. So it's essential for a man to learn how to be this rock. And I think there's some confusion. We're not talking about the rock that doesn't have feelings. We're not talking about stoicism. We're talking about standing on the rock of rationality, of intellectuality, of that very stable place of logic and reason. I think that men need to find themselves on that rock again.
Yeah. And especially what you mentioned regarding freedom, I totally agree. And I have to say, I was very disappointed when 2020 struck, and how little resistance there was against the overreach of governments and nonsensical demands and what have you. Everybody more or less rolled over and went with the flow.
Yep. It is disappointing. I mean, it's got to be disappointing for a woman to see your man collapse in the face of danger. I think that speaks to the culturalization of just how we receive instruction from the matrix, right? Point we've been so used to, like taking media at face value. I mean, so many people, the masses were just like, they were indoctrinated and always grew up believing in that. And so it's taken a few years, but I think a lot of that has changed. I see a lot of people changing, but you know, as a man who has been concerned about these issues and has participated in politics at various levels and written and done writing and engaging with others and having this conversation, like you don't know where to apply your masculinity. I mean, the way that things are the way that things are structured now, like you don't know where to engage this system, right? In my house, it was very like clear from my perspective, from my voice, very on that we weren't doing the vaccines. We're just not doing that. We don't
Mm.
consider this a danger. We look at the numbers and say, okay, whatever small percentage of people um, are dying from COVID, whatever COVID is, whatever the story is with COVID, they're all of a different age bracket. They all have multiple comorbidities. Like we're not in any danger and threat, and so that took a tremendous amount of basically putting up the walls of the fortress and saying, okay, cool, we're not allowing that conversation to affect us. But my wife, being in the corporate world and being in international business, I mean, she was very much faced with, um, a lot of the pressure at the level she was operating in, and she came close to caving sometimes, and but ultimately we were able to hold out, and I think anybody that did hold out at this point really recognizes that they made the right decision. But the point is that it's not easy for anybody right now. And in a sense, that's a separate conversation. It's not easy for anybody right now who has been indoctrinated into this culture and then all of a sudden is told this tremendous lie and has just been like, inherently believes it because they're part of the system and then starts waking up to this. And it's not easy for any person, male or female, to figure out like, how do I assert myself? What's right and wrong in this world? And I think people are still figuring that out. But, um, when you make the comment that you did, I mean, what comes to mind is like a whole bunch of men getting together to defend the village, right? To defend the village. I mean, that really is our roots, right? So if there's actually some really nice, really good content creators on social media that discuss this sort of thing. But, you know, if you just look at the inherent differences between male and female before this society was so big and so interconnected, and before, like our own personal groups got so large, right? Our own like social groups got so large, and before all these influences of advertising and media and propaganda and all these, this evil stuff going on, like we're built differently physically. Um, and we had different roles to play. I mean, I've spent time in the Amazon with shamans in the Amazon, stayed in their village for weeks at a time. And like the Iboga medicine tradition, like you can go to Africa and spend time in the village. Like there's different roles, like the men traditionally go out and they do the hunting. They're the ones that go out into the woods, and they're the ones that, risk snake bites and, animal attacks and drowning and all this stuff to bring back food. But while they're busy doing that, the women are back doing very, very essential roles, just different roles. But if the village ever in the past, if the village was ever under a threat, it was the men who would, address the threat. They're physically capable of addressing the threat, but also just on the grounds that if you look at like the inherent biological drive of any species to reproduce, like that's what we're here to do is reproduce and carry our genetic code into the future. And so, there's an interesting way of looking at it that, men were expendable because it only takes one man to produce numerous offspring, right? Um, one woman can only produce X amount of offspring in her prime, right? Like there's a limited amount of offspring and carrying that genetic code forward that a woman is physically genetically capable of. And so in a sense, like just in relation to that primal drive to reproduce, men were expendable, right? If all the men went out to fight the demons, to fight the invading hordes, and only one of them came back, the tribe would still live, right? They would still live and carry on into the future, right? But if all the women did that, right, like it's the end of the tribe, you know. But so what that speaks to is that I think that men are feeling like they don't have a value, they don't have a purpose, right? There's no reason for them anymore, right? So you have feminism, second wave feminism, and all these things, and I'm absolutely an advocate of people, you know, understanding and pushing for more rights and more equity for themselves or the groups, or whatever. Like that makes perfect sense to me. But in this drive, there's this very toxic level of femininity that I see now. That's pushing men further out into the peripheral, and it's this like I can do anything a man can does. Okay, cool. Well, that's not true.
Nonsense.
It's yeah, it's not it's absolutely not true. Just like it's not true that a man can do anything a woman can do. Right? And so if you throw it on like the whole transgender agendas and all these things onto it, it's very, very confusing. It's very, very confusing for people. But um, men are where does a man go to be a man? You know, what does a man do to be a man? It was like um, you could go off to war, right? You could go off as a mariner, right? You can go off as an oil rigger. You can go off and do these highly masculine, very physical endeavors. But nowadays, I mean, work is office work. It's computer work. It isn't physically taxing. It isn't physically demanding. It doesn't help to develop the body, which is essential to developing and strengthening the spirit. So as a person who's done plenty of years of computer work, like it's very deleterious to our masculine energy to not be exercising our physical selves every day. Like I feel like that's absolutely critical. And any of my clients, when they come to me, when they're experiencing something like this, we always start with the life force, the vigor of the body, right? Like this is your foundation, your platform, right? The way that you live, the way that we live doesn't exercise these energies within you, both physically and energetically. And you don't grow in that way. And in the absence of growth is, decline, is, entropy, right? So like a lot of these masculine qualities and traits that are bolstered by, even like, this whole conversation about testosterone, right? It's testosterone, low T, right? Low T, everybody's on testosterone supplements. Well, my suspicion is that the reason why it's one of the reasons why it's such an issue is not just age, it's how we live. I mean, men don't live in a way that exercises and their body to where that they can actually produce the amount of testosterone over a lifetime that they need. And so, one of my clients recently came to me and he was like, well, I have all these things going on. I see them manifesting, these negative things going on in my life. I see them manifesting at work. I see them manifesting in my marriage, right? And I wonder if I have low T. And I'm like, I'm sure you have low T. He goes, well, I'm gonna get tested. All right, go get tested for low T. Yes, it's very low. Okay, cool. So then the search begins not for how he can find himself or delineate his purpose in the world or change the way he responds to situations. But it's like, oh, okay, cool. If I go to my doctor and get testosterone supplements, then all of this will be water under the bridge. And I just don't think that's true. I mean, there's so much evidence to support that men can boost their actual, hormonal testosterone doing different things, right? All kind of techniques, a totally different conversation, but there's ways that men can boost their testosterone. But in this, this reductionist, scientific, materialistic world that we live in, many men have the false notion now that it's all just about the presence, the level of the presence of a hormone in their body, you know.
Hmm.
And so, I challenged him on that, and this client hasn't taken testosterone supplements yet, and is experiencing a tremendous boost in his feeling of what it feels like to be masculine for him.
Hmm.
He's taking, command and control of his health, his physical body. He's losing weight and rapidly in situations, challenging situations with his wife in a completely different way. And so there's a lot of room for growth people have, men have available to them. But, we live in the quick fix, quick pill, instant gratification world where with all the marketing and the advertising and the social proof that, oh, if I take this one thing, if I take this other thing, like, my problems will be solved. And no, a man has to realize that masculinity is important to his own happiness, and it isn't just about testosterone. It's
Hmm.
about who he is, where he feels limited, and where his options for freedom are. So, like in a relationship, when conflict arises, I know so many men that just, speaking from experience again. Did I lose you there?
No.
Oh, okay. Because the Skype did something weird. Oh, okay. I know what it is. I'm getting a call here. Hold on, let me fix that. Like for a man to hold on, let me get you back here. Something happened on my computer. Sorry about that. Um, there you are. Okay. Sorry about that. Maybe you could edit that little glitch out. But when a man realizes that, when a man finally realizes that what's missing from his life is a sense of personal control over his life, things change. And I think that the inverse of that expresses something very important. What is the opposite of control? You could say that it's impulsivity. So the opposite of some of these things are absolutely corrosive to men's well-being. So like impulsivity, I think, is one of the things that is absolutely most corrosive to masculinity. A man can't control his own impulses. There's no social cues to suggest that we even make an attempt to control our impulses, whether it's, junk food or pornography, right? I mean, there's this glorification of OnlyFans right now, right? Like
Mm.
there's like if you want to emasculate yourself, step into that world. And again, I'm speaking from experience because I've been down that rabbit hole. I've been through that road of porn addiction. It's been a long time, but the effects were so profound that it made once I realized what was happening, there's no turning back. Like there's this strong understanding that to engage in that is to allow my lower self free reign. Right. And so, when I coach with clients and men, it's like the conversation we always have is about taking the high road, the high road. What does your higher self want for you? What is your higher self capable of? What is your higher self missing? What does your higher self need? What does your higher self sound like, look like, and what does your higher self do? And when you really look at like when a man really looks at his life from that, it's almost kind of magical because you realize that there are no problems, there are no situations, there are no conflicts that cannot be outright resolved or dramatically improved by taking the high road. In other words, by saying, okay, I recognize my participation in this. I recognize the role that I have in this. I recognize how I'm participating, and I'm going to change that. And when a man does that and takes that level of responsibility, which so often involves like, mastering impulse control, right? Like things change rapidly. I mean, literally overnight. But that emotionality, like right now, like many of the men I work with, they talk about experiences with their wife and this cycle of being in this sort of like cycle of conflict. And the common denominator over and over and over again is like the conflict is emotional in tone and nature. All right. And so women are emotional beings, and that's awesome, right? Like that's what they're supposed to be, right? But when men are faced with that, a lot of men simply have the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, right? The fear of, you know, a lot of times just the fear of being told no. These things are inhibitive, and they seem too great of an obstacle for men to assert himself, to say no, that's not how I want it, and I want it a different way, and we're going to go along with the way that I want it. And so they collapse into that emotionality as well. And what you find quickly is that, like, when men step out of that emotionality, in terms of conflict with their partner, like things resolve very quickly. There's almost like they recognize they have a magical, unspoken influence on the nature of the relationship, on the quality of the relationship. So the relationships improves not by words, not by being right, not by being understood, not by being clear, not by being compromising, not by being overbearing, but the conflict is literally not even one, but the conflict is elevated and altered, just by the presence of masculinity. And so, like, that's as simple as being calm, being unaffected, not having hurt feelings, right? Not engaging in emotionality. And so these are some of the things I think that easily can help men feel more masculine without the need of testosterone drugs or whatever else it is.
Mm, yeah. Um, what about let's say, the archetype of a warrior? I firmly believe that a warrior is peaceful at heart. Yet that doesn't mean that if needed, he cannot stand up and act accordingly, according what the situation demands. And what I see, we just talked about, how almost everybody rolled over um, uh, during the last few years, and hardly anybody stood up um, when the government was really overreaching. And I think that would have been the perfect time, yeah, to set a mark and to say, this is as far as you go. And if you do not um, retract, then we are going to have a problem.
Yeah, we're going to war. Well, I think a lot
Yeah.
of men did that. I think a lot of men did exactly what you're saying.
Mm.
Not enough,
Yeah, yeah,
perhaps.
not the
Right?
majority,
I don't know,
at least not here.
but like, like the world is what it is. That's the
Mm.
Tao. It just is, right? So clearly, that wasn't the time. The world wasn't ready to shuck off these chains, right? But what was the first part of your question you were asking about?
Yeah, is
Oh,
this
the warrior, right?
archetype
Yeah,
of
the
the
warrior
warrior?
archetype.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
that's
nobody wants, a testosterone-filled male, going around punching everybody for no good reason.
that's
That,
toxic. That would be the toxic masculinity.
yeah,
So,
exactly. But
well, yeah, I mean, a true warrior is what do they say? It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Okay.
mm, mm,
Like a true warrior is a man that's capable of violence, but never has to use it. Right? And this is something that I learned, when I was going through my dark night of the soul in my early 20s, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and uh, complete dark night of the soul, collapse into all the things that we're talking about. It's another story. I probably haven't told you this story on this podcast, but what ended up happening is when I realized that, when I tried to get help for the condition I was in, the despair, the depression, the desperation, the anxiety, all that stuff, when I tried to get help for that, the only solution from the healthcare providers was drugs, 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 drugs. And so I realized that they were crazy and they wanted to drug me and keep me drugged my whole life. And so I was left with no choice but to, figure it out myself. And as, divine providence would have it, like a week later, one of the guys at work was, he'd always would walk back with like nunchucks, spears, bow staffs, swords, all these like classic kung fu weaponry. And so a week after realizing that there was no one coming to save me, I got up and asked him what he was doing. He said, "Come to the kung fu studio." So I came and started kung fu. It changed everything for me. But I quickly realized that like there was like being in that environment where, you're working and training and learning how to hit and take a hit, right? Where you're learning how to be strong and quick and adaptive and assertive, right? Like those tremendously changed everything. And so a warrior is somebody who's capable of great violence, but hopefully never has to use it, right? A very peaceful man, but capable of violence. Okay. So when you say archetype, like it's really important to, I think that the critical archetypes to this conversation are, sort of the four key ones, king, warrior, magician, and lover, right? So an activated human being, especially we're talking about men here. So an activated man is in these are energetic ideas, right? He's living in his king, he's living in his warrior, right? He is a magician, he's a lover, right? Okay. It all sounds great, and it would be could be great if a man were to live this way. I mean, the way that archetypal expression of all of that, like in wholeness, is supposed to play out in a man's life is that the lover within them inspires a desire for whatever it is, a woman, conquest, whatever it is, a desire to build, to explore, to adventure, right? And that lover expresses the desire to the king. And so the king, considers it and says, okay, yes, this is what we're doing, right? We've decided to pursue this desire. Okay. So the kingly energy comes on board. The decree is made. All of that which in my kingdom, we're going to channel our energy on the pursuit of this desire. And so that's when the warrior comes into play, right? So the warrior's job in that situation is to go out and take on the adventure, conquer whatever's in the way, set up the boundaries of the castle, expand the fence lines, expand the territory. That's what the warrior's role is. And the magician's role in all of that is to make things easier, more possible for the attainment of this pursuit, right? So the magician is the one that brings all of the collective experience, knowledge, wisdom into play at the right moment to accelerate time, to make the impossible possible for the warrior and thus for the whole kingdom. So think about like these four forces playing out in a person's life. And, I mean, you've heard really prominent people talk about this. Like we live in an inverted world.
Mm-hmm.
There's an inversion of everything good and wholesome in our world. And that needs to be talked about in relationship to these archetypes because the inversion of the warrior archetype is the victim. The inversion of the king is the child. The inversion of the magician is the saboteur. And the inversion of the lover is the prostitute. Okay.
Mm.
So, truly, truly speaking, of all the people that I know, like there are men who are embodying and living and with all four of those archetypal energies at play in the service for them and their wives and their families. Like it's happening, right? And I do my best. But the majority of men and people that I know are operating either completely inversely, right? Hold on one second. Completely inversely, or they are, one of those components is leading the way, is in command, right? And so for a lot of men, that is the victim. And I hear it all the time. Women as well. We're talking about men, but I hear it all the time. And what that voice sounds like, it sounds like, oh, well, this is unfair. Um, you know, um, it sounds like, well, this is unfair. Why is this happening to me? Why won't they do things the way that I want them? Why won't she just understand and change? Right. this mentality that things are happening to them, not for them or because of them. And so it's something that, obviously something that we work on quite a bit in coaching, but it's difficult, Judith. It's difficult for a man's ego to get out of the way for him to acknowledge that he's operating as a victim instead of a warrior. His job sucks, his boss sucks. There's no opportunities for him. Things are bad in this regard, things are bad in that regard. And what I find over and over again is that if you challenge a man and say, okay, cool, well, what would your warrior do in this situation? Well, they always have great ideas. And then when you say, okay, well, what would a victim do? And it's like they really have a problem with admitting that they are playing the role of the victim. And so again, this is the energy of polarity, right? This is the energy of yin and yang, but like twisted in a way that makes life difficult for men. Um, the victim is kind of it's put on a pedestal, like the culturalization in this, society itself is like we're supposed to be victims. We're supposed to seek help in every turn. We're supposed to get help from our doctors. We're not supposed to know what to do. We're not supposed to be able to solve problems. We're supposed to be able to buy things to solve problems and whatever. Like everything, there are all these cues and this mind control and the subconscious programming around all of this. And so it's difficult for a man to see, but I find that like when men are able to look at things and say, okay, cool, well, if this is on a spectrum, right, one end or the other, how much of a victim am I playing here? How much of am I being a child? I'm not getting what I want. It's like I'm not getting what I want. That's the frustration. So when I talk about the level of desire and the level of energy that men have in their lives, there's so much of this level of desire, this incessant, never-ending wanting something different, wanting something more, right? And there's so much frustration about that, and it's very much a lower state of consciousness. And so when men are driven by these things, like you'll see when you lay it out and talk to them, you'll see like, okay, cool, well, you're acting like a child, entitled, spoiled, wanting, demanding the world give you something, demanding that your partner do something differently, creating expectations and ending up with resentments, right? When you look at the warrior, like, well, I'm a victim. Like, well, I don't have any control over. Well, why do I have to take responsibility for this? Well, why am I the one that, like, why not? Like, who cares? Like massive, all-encompassing personal responsibility is very, very empowering for a man, right? Everything that's happening to me, I have a level of control over. So men in a relationship, when you look at it like that, like she can't do wrong. And it's very, very helpful to the relationship, right? Like, she's going crazy and yelling at me because I'm being a wuss, right? Like, because I'm participating in the emotional madness, right? Rather than just observing the emotional madness and responding intellectually. The inverse of the magician is the saboteur. And so, one of the things I also coach around is self-sabotage.
Mhm.
How are you sabotaging yourself, your relationships, your life, your wealth, your health? Like, the inverse of the magician is somebody who's always standing in your way, like always making things difficult, always fumbling the ball, right? Like, like can't even like that version of you is afraid of winning. It's afraid of feeling different for winning, right? The lover, right, is the inverse of that is the prostitute. I mean, so many men like I know men that make tremendous amounts of money in every year, right? And most people would consider it an extraordinary opportunity and just luck and providence and opportunity for them, to be in that position. But they feel like a prostitute. There's no love behind it, right? It's just simply like I'm doing this. I'm supposed to do this. I have to do this. This is the only way that I can survive. This is the only way that I can survive. I'll do whatever it takes. And so all of this stuff is very important for people, for men especially, to really like assess and understand like how their personal energy is, how they carry themselves, what their personal posture is with themselves and with others. And so martial arts, I think, is something that's really key. And I've done there's the kitty. I've done a number of martial arts. I mean, I've earned a black belt in kung fu and many, many other belts in many other different martial arts over the last 20 plus years. But the last handful of years, I've been like focused on jujitsu. So prior to COVID, I was doing jujitsu, and it was very hard. And when COVID came, I had an injury, and so I like just I stopped training. During the period of a few years, I mean, I stopped training jujitsu. I stopped training for three, almost 4 years. And those 3, 4 years were definitely like when I experienced the what I would say like the collapse of my masculinity. So a lot of that did have to do with COVID and just the complete like all of the things going on in the world. But I took that journey with a boga and I realized like, okay, like my masculinity needs attention, right? Like I need to find ways to invigorate and enliven the yang energy within myself as a man because like I don't feel good about how I'm showing up and it's not helping my family in the best way. And I started training jujitsu again earlier this year, and I went specifically back. I was like, okay, well, I need an arena. I need a place to be a warrior,
Hmm.
right? I need to know what it fucking feels like to be a warrior, right? To win. And so when I started going back and training this year, like within a very short time, it very much changed some very important qualities within myself. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who's a yogi the other day. We were talking about this. In a very short time, it reawakened my will to live, my will to dominate. And it's crazy because if you say I have a will to dominate, you might be told quickly that that's toxic masculinity. No, somebody has to dominate. Somebody has to dominate the forces of nature so we can have hydroelectric dams, and airplanes. Like somebody has to really like master and dominate the forces of nature. So that's an essential character of being a man is the ability to dominate. And there's no arena where men can dominate. And that collapse in their energy, they take that home to their relationships, and then they get dominated in their relationships by the emotionality of the woman. Right. And so, we were talking about jujitsu, and it was like, well, like I was losing a lot, like I kept losing in life. Like I kept thought I was stepping up to bat, but I just kept losing. Right. I kept trying, but I kept losing. Like, no, I wasn't winning anything. Things weren't working out for me. I wasn't winning. And so when you go onto the mat in jujitsu and you bump hands and you slap hands and you say, let's go, let's roll, there's a moment right from the very beginning where something very important is established. Like the position of two opposing warriors, right, is established in the very onset. Like one is going to seek and gain a dominant position, and one is going to permit and earn a submissive position. So as soon as I started training again in jujitsu, it was very profound for me. I started to see this, like you see within a matter of seconds, over and over again in each competition, in each 4 minute match we call rolling, right? Like over and over again. Okay, where is my warrior energy at? Like right off the bat, it's like okay, I could see over and over again, like I'm tuned, right, to allow submission, right, to allow myself to be dominated. I was okay with taking a submissive position over and over again. It got to the point where it's like you just keep losing, getting your butt kicked. It's humbling. That's just part of jujitsu. It's part of any martial art. You're going to lose. I mean, you put your 10,000 reps in. You're going to learn how to win. But what I felt and what I experienced was that like okay, I got to the point over the course of a few weeks, a month and a half, whatever. I was like okay, I keep losing. I know what that feels like now. I know what it feels like to lose, to know you're going to lose, to just keep losing and keep trying, give everything you got, but still losing and losing and losing. I'm tired of losing. I'm done. I'm done losing. And so then you find yourself with a reawakened, a reinvigorated, like will to live, a will to survive, a will to dominate, a will to overcome, a will to penetrate, a will to be free, basically to be free of someone else's controlling grip on you. I mean, it's such a perfect metaphor. When somebody has you in a chokehold, you're absolutely not free, physically not free. And so I felt that energy awaken within myself, and it shows up when you just again, you bump hands, slap fists, whatever, and you say go, like right from the get go. Does this man want to win? Does this man want to win? I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. Does this man want to win in life? Does he want to win on the mat? And it's so obvious in that situation. And so, the warrior is essential, but it doesn't mean, going out and killing people. It's just about the energy that you possess on a day-to-day basis and the energy that you carry, the posture that you carry yourself with. Do you have the will to survive, the will to live, the will to dominate, the will to express your will? And a lot of that's missing, of course. But
Yeah, we also find it in movies and TVs
yeah,
where, a lot of male characters are, yeah, I don't know, portrayed as stupid, clumsy, and if they didn't have the women, they wouldn't know how to tie their shoes. And, for instance, here I wrote down the subtitle of the movie Dungeons and Dragons. And
oh
it
boy.
says, yeah, and it says in the subtitle, the Dungeon and Dragons movies writing team reveal they intentionally emasculated the leading men in the film and put the women on the front lines. Why can't we have strong characters of both genders? A strong male in the movie and a strong female. Well, what's wrong with that?
So we're living in the time of inversion, like
Yeah.
that truly is. I mean, you know, giving kids puberty blocking drugs, gender reversing, changing surgeries, all these kind of things. I mean, like we live in the time of inversion.
Mm.
And so, like, to me, that's just, you just have to accept that. Like, I don't have to watch Dungeons and Dragons, but I probably will. And when I watch it, I'm not going to expect to see a masculine, powerful, embodied male. I'm going to expect to see an artist's representation of what it would be like if a female was in that role. In other words, I don't take it seriously. I don't take it figuratively. But I, I know, and I don't even know if this is what women really want, but I know a lot of women who claim that they want to be that. They want to be the warrior. They want to be in command and control, and do whatever you want to do, folks, right? Just don't shit on other people, but do whatever you want to do. But I was in a situation just last night, which is relevant to this conversation. It was very, very important. I mean, my wife and my little guy, my 12-year-old, we went to the store together, and then we went to go check out. They just refurbished the playground up the street, and went to go check it out. So we go out to the store, and we go to the park. We park in the park, and two parking spots over from us, there's these two women. And I didn't notice I was on the passenger side, so I got out and started walking to the park. And my wife says, "Hey, hold on a minute, honey. There's two women over here look like they might be having a problem with their tire." I was like, "Oh, okay. I'll go see if I can help." And it's two women, nice car, whatever, and they're working to jack up the car, one of the rear tires, right? And I'm like, "Hey, you guys need help?" "No, no, no, we got this, we got this." I'm like, "Okay, what's going on? You get it flat or whatever?" "No, I just think something's wrong with the brakes." I'm like, "All right, well, yeah, sure I can." And you saw them like try to like resist that, like they were like, "No, no, no," like skeptical, right? Like, why does this guy want to help me, whatever. And so I just went calmly over and I was like, "Yeah, I mean, what's going on?" She's like, "Well, I can't get these lug nuts off." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'll help you get the lug nuts off," like within, a few seconds, like the lug nuts are coming off, and she's like, "Oh, great, this is awesome." I'm like, "Well, see, you trying to work that jack. I mean, well, let me show you how to do it a little differently so it's easier, and make sure you got it in the right spot and everything so it's not dangerous, and make sure the wheels are chucked and all this kind of." So they just kind of stood back and started doing all this, and they were like, "What's the problem?" "Oh, well, we think it's this." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's look at that." "Oh, it's not your brake pads. I can see your brake pads are in good condition here, so it's got to be something else. What else could it be?" Well, in that case, let's not. Long story short, right? Like, went through this whole thing where it's like, I mean, I'm a dude. I've worked on cars, right? I fixed tires, right? Like, it's not exclusively a male thing, but it's the kind of a thing that a whole male does, right? Like, I've taught my daughter how to change tires and this and that. At the end, it was very interesting because this really nice woman, she said something along the lines of like, "Oh my God, like, thank you really, really so much. Thank you. I don't think I would have been able to do that by myself. I just needed a man's strength to help me with the lug nuts.
Mhm.
Needed a man's strength to help with the lug nuts." And in the end, what ended up happening was I showed her a way to do the lug nuts that she could do herself. She could use her leg, as a leverage on the on the lug wrench, right? Like, And so like to me, there's a synergistic like that's a situation like a man is assertive, not in a toxic way. No, I'd like to help you out with this. I'd like to be here and assist you with this. I'd like to share my wisdom, experience, and strength with you. The woman was in a position where she had to choose to submit to that, to accept that, to allow that in, to be vulnerable to that. And you could tell like it was difficult at first, right? But when she allowed that in, it was a very complimentary experience for both of us, right? I got a
Mm.
lot out of it as a man. Like men love helping people, like men love doing things for other people. And I think that's part of it. Like, women, if you're listening out there and you want your man to be more masculine, find stuff for him to do. Don't, it's not in a nagging way. When he asks you if there's something he can do to help, find something for him to help with. Right? Give him a purpose, a small purpose, right? Like let him in, let him exercise his experience, strength, and wisdom and whatnot. Give him as many opportunities as you can to express that. Like that's very, very emasculating for a man to be given opportunities from his woman to express his power. So
Mm.
the harmony is there. It naturally exists. It's the natural way. It's the Tao, right? That's the way it is. It is there. But people's understanding of how important that is and how to achieve and find that homeostasis, that balance, that harmony is let's just say it's out of whack right now, right? And so it's not something that is going to come from uh, media is not going to fix it. Movies aren't going to fix it. There's no new movie with a new strong male character and a strong. That's not going to change the perception. It all happens within the individual. And that's really one of the reasons why I've just shifted gears from focusing on trying to assist, like help people understand what's going on in the world in mass to like working directly just with one-on-one individuals. Like the power is within you. In fact, there's this really, really excellent essay by Carl Jung. It's a small book called The Undiscovered Self. And in that book, there's probably 6 or 7 essays. The first essay has to do with individuality, and it's really interesting. It's an essay where Carl Jung, in my view, he comes out swinging against the state and what the state represents. Because the way that he describes it is that, like, basically, like, the state is the antithesis, is anathema to individuality. And individuality is what's special and what's preserving. Like, that's what's important. That's what makes people feel alive at home within themselves. But everything that the state and that institutionalized apparatus and all of its manifestations, whether it's the government laws, whether it's the media, the propaganda, the agencies which control us and corral us through taxing and regulations, all of that stuff is absolutely unequivocally anti-individualistic. And I don't think a man is happy being part of the Borg of the hive. I think men are here
Mm.
to express their own power in whatever ways that feel right to them.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of Borgs, I have a distinct feeling that, when you dig deep enough, what will raise its ugly head is transhumanism, all the confusion about gender and what have you. The more confused people are about themselves, the easier they will accept merging with a machine.
Yeah, I mean, and I know you've had guests on this show that speak about this very eloquently in with great articulation. But confusion is an essential component of mind control,
Yeah.
right? Like I mean, take it even down to the individual, quote unquote terrorist in a cell at Guantanamo or whatever. Like it is, it's procedure to confuse that individual. When is day? When is night? When like when am I allowed to sleep? When am I not? When will I get food? When will I not get food? Was this going to be the good cop or the bad cop? Right? Is this guy going to hit me, beat me, waterboard me, whatever? Is this guy all of a sudden come in here and be my, like confusion is an essential part of capturing someone's mind. And like I said, I know you've had guests that speak to this very well, but yeah, you could talk about that all day long, but it's up to the individual to say, hey, you know what? It's like use a quote, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Enough is enough, right? The pleasure of participating in this, the debauchery and all this isn't worth the pain of not feeling like myself and not feeling like I have integrity and purpose in the world. And so again, whatever the agenda is, who, you know, whatever it is. I know you and I could have many conversations about the agenda, but it doesn't matter in an individual's life. Whatever the weather is, whatever the climate is, whatever the temperature is of wherever he's at, like that person, every individual is required to react or respond in whatever way they can or choose to, consciously or unconsciously. Like we all respond and react as individuals, even in the collective madness and in the confusion. So again, like, you know, for people I work with, like, you know, we come out of the weeds of that confusion in their own lives, right? The clarity, get clarity on their own lives. And, you know, what are the things that inhibit clarity? They're the same things that emasculate men. You know, addiction is incredibly corrosive to masculinity. Addiction is incredibly emasculating. You know, like it's a complete relinquishing of your spirit to impulse, right? Like you don't have control. You're not the dominant character in your own story, right? When you strip away the chemical addictions that people have, and many men have, I mean, geez, the booze, the drugs, it's insane. The pills, it's insane. When you strip all of that away, what you find out, and this is, you know, when I work with men and women, this comes up every single time. We find out that like there is an addiction to an emotional process, an emotional pattern, an emotional habit, if you will, that's more powerful than any of the addictions to any of the substances because you don't see it, you don't recognize. You know, like if I'm addicted to heroin, I can see the heroin. I know that I have to go buy the heroin. I can feel the struggle of trying to score more heroin, right? I could see like me inserting the heroin into my body, right? Like you see all that. But you take that away, and the person's still left with what drove them to be a heroin addict in the first place, which is an addiction to emotionality, addiction to an emotional way of being. And people don't see that. Like when you feel a certain way in your body, and you know, most of what we're talking about here is like can be recognized through the fight or flight response. Like when you feel that response, the anxiety that like when people feel afraid of what their partners are going to say if they speak their truth, when they feel afraid of, you know, what the man's going to say if they reject the vaccine, like that triggers a fight or flight response. It gives that person a chemical a release, you know, release of all kind of neurochemicals and you know, the cortisols, the adrenalines, you know, all of these things are released into their body, more powerful than heroin. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't get to see that process in action, so you discount it. You don't recognize there's a chemical addiction taking place. And so I think that like for men who understand the conversation that we're having and understand the value of elevating themselves in this regard, it's very, very important to understand where you lack control, right? Where you lack control within yourself, not control over other people, because that's what a scared person does. That's what an insecure, frightened person with low integrity does when they're afraid. They try to control everything in the environment. They could control what other people do, what other people think, circumstances, whatnot, right? We're talking about a man who understands that he recognizes that he doesn't feel powerful in his relationship. You know, he recognizes that he's a pushover at work. He doesn't get the promotions or the accolades that he deserves because he lets people walk all over him, this and that. You know, like for a man that wants to experience that, like their own self-esteem, their own self-integrity is like the place to start, the place to begin, right? And nothing gives a man more esteem than mastering control over his own impulses. Nothing gives a man more of an integral feeling, an integrated whole feeling of himself for himself than um, having control over his demons, his shadows, his weaknesses, right? And so much of those are expressed as emotional states, right? When I'm, you know, the fear, overwhelm, anxiety, doubt. When a man can master those emotional conditions within himself, he doesn't have to participate in the madness of the world. He doesn't have to participate in the, you know, the up and down, chaotic, beautiful, wonderful, natural storms of a woman that he loves. He doesn't have to participate in it. He can observe and choose what level to respond to. So I think that, you know, like to sort of like bring this full circle, like to reconnect with masculinity. It's not about who you have sex with, how you have sex, how much money you make, what job you have, what car you drive. It's just the cat's so funny. Oh my gosh. If people are listening to this and not seeing it, like Judith's cat is just like back and forth in front of her face with her tail. I mean, there she goes again. But like the it's not about testosterone enhancement drugs, right? It's not about testosterone replacement therapy or whatever, right? It's about like reconnecting to your own sense of integrity. I don't think there's anything as spiritually deleterious or harmful to a human being as negating on their word that they made to themselves. In other
Hmm.
words, you know what I mean? Like not holding up your own word for yourself, right? Not having self integrity. Those things are very, very, very damaging to the soul, the spirit, because if you can't count on you, then nobody can count on you, not even your higher self, right? And so, if a man's looking for a place to start, yeah, I mean, like nurture your life force, develop strength physically, but develop strength emotionally. Like understand that keeping your word to yourself, being the kind of man. It's not about being the kind of man who like bosses every workout and has got massive biceps and pecs and stuff. It's about being the man who has enough integrity not to miss a workout. You know what I mean? Like there's a different calibration of purpose in that, right? I'm
Hmm.
the kind of man that does what I say I'm going to do for myself, right? Versus like I'm the kind of man who goes out and seeks certain things to change my appearance or the way that people perceive me in the world. And so I think like yeah, I think to me like that's really the critical aspect of rekindling and developing and enhancing and like evolving one's masculinity is being integrous within themselves, recognizing where they're not free within their own psyche, within their own ways of thinking, with their own belief systems, and dealing with that, like achieving freedom of that first within themselves. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are perfect words to end our
guys,
conversation. I thought today I will be uninterrupted by my cat. She took a long nap in my bed,
that
but
seems to
of
be the
course,
case.
yeah, yeah.
That
So
seems to
I
be the
think,
case.
yeah, I thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, you too.
It's funny because like I don't know, again, if you're listening to this and you're not watching the YouTube version, like she's got the automatic background thing on Zoom, and so the cat literally just appears and disappears. Sometimes just the head will appear, just the body. It's quite hilarious and trippy. So yeah, Judith, it's always a joy, and yeah, I appreciate you as well, and keep doing the work that you do. But thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. I appreciate it.
Okay, so until next time, guys, this was it, and
Oh
we
yeah,
will.
and just for the record, like my website, dylancharlescoaching.com. It's really the best place to find me. You can sign up to my newsletter and to reach out to me there. I think that's important. Oh, also batteredsouls.com is my podcast. Kind of getting back into that. Don't do a lot of work at wakingtimes.com these days, but that's still up as well. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.